My name is Grace Anderson, and for 15 years, I was the family disappointment. While my sister collected Harvard degrees and six-figure job offers, I taught finger painting to 5-year-olds in a small public school. It never mattered that I loved what I did. It never mattered that I saw joy on the faces of my students every single day. To my parents, love didn't count as success. Only money and reputation did. Last week, at my sister's graduation party, that truth became impossible to ignore. The ballroom sparkled with chandeliers, laughter, and people dressed like walking magazines. I stood near the back, holding a glass of champagne that tasted more like embarrassment than celebration. Then, in front of 200 guests, my parents handed Isabella the keys to a brand new Tesla and the deed to a $13 million penthouse overlooking Manhattan. The applause was deafening. My parents called her the only success story of the Anderson family. The only one. I smiled politely, the way I always did, pretending it didn't sting. But deep down, something inside me cracked that night. I had worked so hard to build a life filled with meaning, but in my family's eyes, that meant nothing. I wasn't the daughter who conquered Wall Street or the one who carried designer handbags. I was the one who mixed paint for children who sometimes couldn't even afford lunch. I felt invisible, until a stranger in a charcoal suit walked toward me through the crowd. He looked calm, older, and strangely familiar. He handed me an envelope and whispered something that made the noise around me fade away. "Your grandfather knew the truth." His voice was low, certain, and filled with weight I couldn't explain. Before I could ask him anything, he disappeared into the sea of champagne glasses and designer gowns. I held that envelope in my hands for what felt like an hour. My grandfather had been gone for 10 years. What truth could he possibly have left behind for me? I didn't open it right away. I just watched my family from a distance. My parents, glowing with pride. My sister, basking in their admiration. Everyone clapping for her brilliance, her beauty, her hard work. And me, just Grace, the teacher. The girl who never made it big. The girl who stayed small. But that night, something told me that envelope might change everything. The Anderson family penthouse overlooked Central Park from the 68th floor. Every morning when I used to visit, I'd see my parents sipping coffee from crystal mugs, planning Isabella's future from their $50,000 dining table. The Monet original above their fireplace cost more than I'd make in 20 years. My apartment, on the other hand, was a tiny studio in Queens with peeling paint and a radiator that sounded haunted. Isabella carried Hermes bags that cost more than my rent, while I carried a canvas tote I'd painted myself during college. My parents made sure everyone noticed the difference. "Grace teaches at PS 47, my mother would whisper at parties, as if confessing a sin. "Isabella just made law review at Harvard," she'd add proudly. The comparisons came like clockwork, each one a quiet reminder that I didn't measure up. What they never saw was how much I loved my work. The laughter of children discovering color for the first time. The joy of a shy student proudly showing her first drawing. Parents thanking me with tears in their eyes because their child, who barely spoke before, now expressed themselves through art. My classroom was full of tiny miracles. But none of that mattered at the country club or in their cocktail conversations. To them, I was a symbol of failure dressed in modest clothes. Still, I showed up to every family event. Not for them. For my grandfather. He'd always believed in me. Before he passed, he told me, "Grace, you're going to change the world, but not the way they expect." I thought he meant my teaching. I had no idea he meant something much bigger. When Isabella graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Law, it was all anyone could talk about. Her watch, a graduation gift from Dad, cost more than my car. Her job offer from a top law firm came before she even threw her cap in the air. She was 28, 4 years younger than me, and already a rising star. Meanwhile, I was still buying tempera paint on sale and wondering if my paycheck would stretch to next month's rent. The family group chat that week was filled with her photos: Isabella in her gown, shaking hands with the dean, posing with senators, basking in the praise of CEOs. My message: "Congratulations, Bella," got a heart emoji. Nothing more. They didn't know about the 8 National Education Awards sitting in my desk drawer, or the art therapy program I'd built from scratch that served hundreds of children with disabilities. In my family's language, those weren't achievements. Those were hobbies. When the Ivory M. Gold invitation arrived for her graduation party, I almost didn't go. "Grace, please dress appropriately," my mother had written at the bottom. I stood in front of my closet for an hour before choosing my simple black dress from Target. Isabella would be in custom Versace, of course. I took the subway to the St. Regis Hotel, clutching my small gift, a hand-painted frame with a quote about kindness that I knew she'd never hang. The ballroom was dazzling. Chandeliers glowed like captured stars. The air smelled of roses and expensive perfume. Every guest seemed to know one another, each handshake a transaction in power and money. My parents moved through the crowd like royalty. I stood quietly near the back, smiling when people passed, unnoticed as always. But I felt the man in the charcoal suit watching me. He wasn't part of my sister's glamorous circle. There was something grounded about him, something old-fashioned. He watched me with a kind of knowing, like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. I felt a shiver, not of fear, but of anticipation. Then the clinking of a gold pen against glass silenced the room. My father took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice booming, "we're here tonight to celebrate the only success story that matters in the Anderson family." I froze. He didn't even try to hide it. The only success story. He raised his glass toward Isabella, who looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. "My daughter, the Harvard Law graduate," he said proudly. "The one who makes us proud every single day." Applause erupted. My mother glowed beside him. I stared down at my shoes, willing myself not to cry. Then came the surprise gifts. My father pulled out a velvet box and handed Isabella the keys to her Tesla. The crowd gasped. Then my mother stepped up and presented the envelope containing the deed to the Tribeca penthouse. $13 million worth of concrete proof that love, in our family, came with a price tag. I felt my chest tighten as people cheered. Around me, guests whispered compliments about Isabella's brilliance, her beauty, her success. Not one person noticed the teacher standing near the shrimp display, trying to keep her hands from trembling. Then my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number appeared. "Don't leave early tonight. Your grandfather left you more than memories." My heart skipped a beat. I looked up, searching the crowd. The man in the charcoal suit met my eyes and lifted his glass slightly, almost like a secret signal. My father continued speaking, his voice echoing off the marble walls. "This Tesla is just the beginning," he said. "Isabella has proven herself capable of carrying the Anderson name forward." The guests applauded again, but I barely heard them. The room felt smaller now, the air heavier. The envelope in my purse suddenly felt like it weighed 10 pounds. My mother's voice pulled me back. "Grace, come here, please." I froze. Every time she used that tone, it meant something unpleasant was coming. "We need you on stage," she said sweetly, though her eyes warned me to obey. Isabella smiled from the microphone, her voice smooth and practiced. I want to thank everyone for celebrating this special moment with us, she began. Success isn't easy. It takes courage, ambition, and the will to reach higher than. She paused, her eyes locking on mine. Finger paints and participation trophies. A ripple of laughter moved through the room. My face burned. I could feel 200 eyes pretending not to stare. Someone whispered, "That's harsh." Another said, "But true." Isabella continued, her smile sharp. Some people are content with small lives and small dreams. And that's fine. The world needs people to teach children their ABCs while others argue cases before the Supreme Court. The laughter grew. I stood frozen, every word cutting deeper. My mother's forced smile did nothing to hide the satisfaction in her eyes. My father clapped proudly for Isabella's speech. And me? I wanted to disappear. Then a calm, steady voice interrupted her. "Excuse me," the man in the charcoal suit said, stepping forward. The crowd fell silent. The confidence in his tone commanded attention. "My name is Harold Whitman," he continued. "I was William Anderson's attorney for 40 years. My father's smile faltered. My mother's glass trembled slightly. Harold reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather envelope, the same one he had given me earlier that evening. "Before any more announcements are made," he said gently, "there is something that must be addressed." The room went still. My father cleared his throat. "Mr. Whitman, this is a private celebration," he said firmly. "Whatever business you have can wait." "I'm afraid it cannot," Harold replied. His calm tone carried more authority than my father's roar ever could. "Especially considering what you are about to do." My parents exchanged a quick glance, one that spoke volumes. They knew something they never wanted revealed. My pulse pounded in my ears. As I was saying, my father hurried on, "Isabella will also be inheriting the entirety of the Anderson estate. She's proven herself capable of managing substantial assets." Gasps rose around the room. My mother beamed. Isabella's smile widened. Then my father looked directly at me. "Grace," he said, his voice soft but cold, "simply doesn't have the capacity for such responsibility." The words hit like a punch. He gestured toward my mother, who was already reaching into her expensive clutch. She pulled out another envelope and held it toward me. "We just need you to sign this waiver of inheritance rights, sweetheart. It's what's best for everyone." My stomach twisted. The crowd murmured. This wasn't a celebration anymore, it was an ambush. "Come on up, Grace," my father said into the microphone. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." 200 people watched me as I walked toward the stage. I could feel their eyes on my cheap dress, their judgment like static in the air. My mother smiled sweetly, handing me a Mont Blanc pen. "Just sign here, dear." I looked at the paper, the fancy legal language blurring before my eyes. Then I heard Harold's voice again, firm and clear. "I really must insist you stop." My father turned on him. "You have no authority here." Harold smiled slightly. "Your father would disagree. And since he's the one who built this empire you're so eager to distribute, I'd say his opinion matters." I froze. My heart raced. The envelope. The message. The look on my parents' faces. Something big was about to happen. The room seemed to hold its breath. The man who everyone thought was just another guest was about to change everything. And as I stood on that stage, pen in hand, surrounded by 200 strangers waiting for me to sign away my worth, I had no idea that one sentence from that old man would rewrite my entire life. The room fell silent. Every eye turned toward the man in the charcoal suit. The chandeliers reflected off the gold seal on the envelope he held, making it gleam like something sacred. My father's confident smile faltered, his jaw tightening. My mother's hand clutched her clutch so tightly her knuckles went white. And me, I stood frozen, holding a pen that suddenly felt heavier than stone. William Anderson, Harold began, his voice calm and steady, left very clear instructions about what should happen when this family gathered to celebrate what he called, and I quote, the illusion of success. Murmurs rippled through the ballroom. People leaned in, curious. My father laughed nervously. Mr. Whitman, this is hardly the time, it's exactly the time, Harold interrupted. Because tonight was the night he predicted. Down to the hour. A chill ran down my spine. The room had gone from festive to electric, as though everyone could sense something monumental was about to happen. Harold opened the envelope, sliding out a stack of papers bound with a red ribbon. This, he said, is the real last will and testament of William Anderson. My father's face turned crimson. That's impossible. The will was read 10 years ago. Everything was left to me. That's the version you filed, Harold replied evenly. But not the version your father actually signed. The crowd gasped. A woman whispered, "Is this for real?" Someone else muttered, "Oh, this is better than television." My mother stepped forward, her voice trembling but still trying to sound composed. "Mr. Whitman, surely there's been some mistake. My husband handled all of that himself." Harold looked at her kindly but firmly. "Yes, ma'am. And he handled it incorrectly, deliberately or not. William Anderson anticipated that might happen, which is why he deposited copies with 3 separate law firms and left me with very specific instructions about when to reveal them." He turned to me. "Miss Anderson, your grandfather asked that you be present when I read this aloud. He said you were the only one who would truly understand what he meant." My breath caught in my throat. I nodded silently. "Proceed," my father said, his voice sharp as broken glass. Harold unfolded the first page. This document was signed and notarized on March 15, 2015. It supersedes all previous versions of the will. It was witnessed by Judge Patricia Hornby, Dr. Michael Chen, and Eleanor Roosevelt III, all of whom can testify to its authenticity. He paused, letting the silence stretch. Article 1, he continued. To my son, Robert Anderson, and his wife, Margaret, I leave the lessons they chose to ignore. The crowd erupted in quiet whispers. My father stiffened. My mother's lips parted, but no sound came out. Article 2, Harold read on. To my granddaughter, Isabella Anderson, I leave the opportunity to rediscover what real success means. She has been given every advantage, and perhaps in losing them, she may find herself. Isabella laughed, a brittle, nervous sound. This is absurd. He must have been confused. Harold ignored her and turned to the next page. Article 3, he said, and his voice softened. To my granddaughter, Grace Anderson, I leave my trust, my company, my estate, and my name, to be used in service of others, as she has always done quietly and without praise. The entire ballroom seemed to stop breathing. I felt the blood drain from my face. My father's hand slammed the podium. That's enough. This circus ends now. Sit down, Robert, Harold said, not unkindly but with authority that made even my father hesitate. Your father was meticulous. He predicted every reaction. He said you'd call this a circus. He even said you'd try to interrupt before Article 7. What's Article 7? I asked softly, my voice barely audible. Harold smiled faintly. The truth clause. My parents exchanged a look, Fear flickered across both their faces. Isabella's eyes darted between us, her confidence slipping. Harold turned the page. Your grandfather spent the last decade of his life gathering evidence, documenting the choices both of his granddaughters made. He wanted the family fortune to go to the one who truly embodied the values he built it upon: integrity, compassion, and service to others. He lifted a thick folder from his briefcase. This contains those findings. He set it on the podium. It was labeled in bold letters, Grace Anderson. My niece felt weak. Within this file, Harold continued, are letters, testimonials, awards, and verified records of the work you've done, Grace. He hired private investigators not to spy, but to protect your legacy. Every student you helped, every family you supported, every dollar you donated, every art therapy session you built, it's all here. Gasps filled the room. My father stepped forward. This is manipulation. He was senile. Harold looked up, his expression calm but unyielding. Medical records show William Anderson was of sound mind until his final day. He even recorded a video message for this very moment. The crowd buzzed with whispers again. My hand shook as Harold pulled out a tablet. He tapped the screen. The ballroom lights dimmed automatically, and suddenly my grandfather's face appeared, older and kind, on the giant projector behind the stage. Hello, family, he said in that familiar warm tone I hadn't heard in a decade. If you're watching this, it means I've gone, and Harold has done his job. He smiled slightly. Robert, I know you're angry already. Margaret, please stop clutching your pearls. And Isabella, take a deep breath. You'll need it. Laughter rippled nervously through the crowd. My father's face turned scarlet. My grandfather continued, you see, I built my fortune teaching, not scheming. My son forgot that. He chased wealth and forgot wisdom. But Grace never forgot what matters. His eyes seemed to find mine through the screen. She builds souls, not skyscrapers. She lifts others quietly while the rest of you chase applause. Tears blurred my vision. I covered my mouth, trying to keep my composure. Grace, my grandfather's voice softened. I knew you'd stand there tonight feeling small. You're not. You are the measure of everything I hoped this family would be. That's why everything I've built, every dollar, every building, every investment, belongs to you. Use it to heal the world the way you've always done. The video ended. The lights came back on. Silence followed. Then, chaos. My father shouted, "This is fraud." My mother screamed, "Turn that off." Isabella cried out, "This isn't fair." Guests whispered, cameras clicked, and Harold calmly raised his hand. Order, please. There's more. He opened another folder, this one thinner, marked Isabella Anderson. William Anderson believed in fairness, Harold said. So he recorded Isabella's record as well. He read aloud, Harvard Law. Excellent academic performance. Minimal community engagement. One charity auction organized with a $15,000 administrative fee. No unpaid service work. No verified acts of mentorship or philanthropy beyond legal requirements. The murmurs grew louder. Isabella's face turned white. That's taken out of context, she shouted. Harold looked at her gently. Your grandfather said context doesn't change character. He turned toward the guests. He created measurable criteria for this inheritance, letters from families, awards from institutions, verified public service. Grace met every requirement tenfold. My father's voice trembled with rage. We will contest this. Of course you will, Harold replied. He said you would. I couldn't move. Every emotion collided inside me: shock, disbelief, sorrow, and a flicker of vindication. My whole life, I'd been told I was less. Now the truth stood in black and white before everyone. My mother tried to recover her poise. "Mr. Whitman," she said, her voice sugary, "surely you can understand the embarrassment this causes. Let's handle this privately." Harold sighed. "Margaret, if you treated Grace privately with respect all these years, perhaps we wouldn't be here publicly." The room gasped again. Then he turned to me. "Grace, your grandfather left you one final request. He wanted you to decide, do you wish for this reading to continue publicly or privately?" My throat tightened. Every instinct in me wanted to shrink back. To say, let's do this quietly. But then I thought of every dinner where I sat invisible, every laugh at my expense, every moment my parents made me feel like my purpose was a joke. "Read it publicly," I said, my voice trembling but firm. Harold nodded once. "Very well. Article 7, the Truth Clause, continues." He flipped to the next page. William Anderson writes, "Should my family attempt to diminish Grace or force her into compliance, their inheritance is revoked immediately and transferred to her in full. This condition activates upon any public humiliation or coercion directed at her." The room erupted again. My father shouted over the noise. "You can't be serious." Harold smiled faintly. I'm afraid he was quite serious. "Especially considering what you tried to do tonight, forcing her to sign away her rights in front of witnesses." Someone in the crowd whispered, "Oh my God, it's happening." Harold looked directly at me. "Grace, the trust fund, the properties, and the company are already transferring into your name as we speak. Your grandfather's legal team is watching this live." My hands went numb. I gripped the podium to keep from falling. Isabella's face crumpled. My father staggered back, disbelief written across every line of his face. Harold continued, "William Anderson wanted his wealth to serve people, not pride. He said, if my son forgets that, then let my granddaughter remind him." I could hear the clicking of phones. People were recording. The Anderson family scandal was unfolding in real time. Isabella finally found her voice. "You can't take everything from me," she cried. "I worked hard." Harold's gaze softened. "Your grandfather didn't take anything from you. He's giving you something you've never had, a chance to learn what real worth feels like." Tears filled my eyes again, not just from shock, but from an overwhelming sense of justice finally arriving after years of silence. But Harold wasn't finished. He held up one more sealed envelope. "Grace," he said gently, "there's something your grandfather wanted you to have privately, but you may read it aloud if you choose." He handed it to me. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a single handwritten letter. My grandfather's familiar script filled the page. "My dear Grace," it began. "I watched you from afar for years, knowing your parents would never see your light. I documented every moment you made the world brighter because I knew one day, truth would need proof. You built beauty where others built walls. You chose meaning over money. When they call you small, remember this: small seeds grow forests. You are my forest." The words blurred through tears. "Love, grandfather." The room was utterly silent. Not a whisper, not a sound. Even the string quartet had stopped playing. My parents stood frozen, stripped of all their practiced grace. Isabella stared at me, her mascara streaking down her face. Then Harold spoke softly into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, William Anderson's legacy has found its rightful steward. Grace, the estate is yours. What you do with it next will define the future of this family. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt whole. For the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. My father opened his mouth, but no sound came out. My mother looked away, unable to meet my eyes. Isabella whispered something I couldn't hear. The world had shifted in a single night. And yet, deep inside, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Because the real question wasn't what I had inherited, it was what I would do with it. For a long moment, no one in the ballroom moved. 200 people stood frozen between disbelief and curiosity. The air felt thick, like the pause between thunder and rain. My father still held the microphone, but it no longer carried power. My mother stared at the floor. Isabella's hands shook, her perfect posture collapsing inch by inch. I could hear the cameras of cell phones clicking, recording every detail of the night the Anderson family fell apart. I looked around the room and suddenly saw faces I had never really noticed before, the waiters standing along the walls, the florist clutching a tray of champagne, the young violinist wiping tears from her eyes. They weren't part of our glittering world, but they understood something the rich often forget: truth feels heavier than money. Harold leaned closer and said quietly, "You can step away now if you'd like. The legal part is complete." But I didn't move. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to hide in the background. "I'll stay," I said. My voice sounded steady, calm, almost detached from the chaos around me. I turned to my father. "You said I couldn't handle responsibility," I whispered. "Maybe it's time you watch me try." He opened his mouth to respond, but the words never came. My sister's tears fell onto the marble floor. "Grace, please," she said, "you don't understand what this means. They'll talk about us for years." "I know," I said softly. "But maybe that's how lessons last." The guests began to drift toward the exits, whispering behind their hands. Some offered me timid smiles of respect. Others simply stared. The chandeliers flickered as the staff dimmed the lights, but the golden glow around the stage stayed steady. Harold gathered the documents and slipped them back into his leather case. When the last guest left, silence wrapped around us like a heavy coat. My parents stood on one side of the stage, Isabella beside them. I stood alone on the other. For a moment, no one spoke. Then my father's voice broke the quiet. "Do you think you won tonight?" he asked. I looked at him and shook my head. "No, Dad. I think I finally learned what winning really means." He laughed bitterly. "You'll see. It's not easy to run a company. You'll drown in a month." "Maybe," I said. "But at least I'll drown trying to do something good." Harold cleared his throat gently. "Grace, there are legal documents we need to sign at my office tomorrow morning. The transfer is already in motion. You'll need to decide about the company immediately." I nodded. "I'll be there." My mother finally looked up. Her makeup had run, leaving dark circles under her eyes. "You're making a mistake," she whispered. "We built this world for Isabella." "No, Mom," I said quietly. "Grandfather built it for all of us. You just forgot what he built it for." She turned away, tears shining on her cheeks. As I left the ballroom, Harold walked beside me. "He was proud of you, Grace," he said. "He told me you'd hesitate before taking the money, but you wouldn't hesitate when it came time to use it for good." The night air outside the hotel was cold and sharp. Taxis honked in the distance. I stood on the sidewalk, still in my simple black dress, feeling the world shift beneath my feet. For 33 years I had lived small, invisible, ordinary. Now the entire Anderson empire was mine. But all I could think about were the children waiting for me in my art class tomorrow morning. The next day the city felt different. Even the subway seemed to hum with new energy. When I arrived at Harold's office, a tall building filled with glass and silence, he greeted me with a smile and a stack of papers. "These finalize the transfer," he explained. "You'll have full control within 48 hours. The accounts, the properties, the business holdings, everything." I stared at the pages covered in fine print. "This is a lot." "It is," he said gently. "But you don't have to carry it alone. Your grandfather left a team of advisors. And he left you something else." He handed me a small wooden box. Inside was an old fountain pen and a note in my grandfather's handwriting, for when she finally writes her own story. I smiled through tears. He really thought of everything. Harold nodded. He believed wealth only matters when it builds bridges instead of walls. He trusted you to build them. I signed the final document with the old pen. The ink bled slightly on the page, like it had been waiting years to be used. When I left the office, reporters were already waiting. Microphones flashed. "Miss Anderson, is it true you inherited the entire estate? Will you be keeping the company? Is your sister suing?" I held up my hand and said simply, "No comment, yet." Then I walked away. I had more important people to see. That afternoon, I returned to PS 47. The children were finishing lunch. When they saw me, they ran toward me shouting, "Miss Anderson." Their paint-stained hands left smudges on my sleeves, and I didn't care. The smell of glue and crayons felt like home. One of my students, little Emily, tugged my sleeve. "Miss Anderson, are you okay? You were on my mom's phone last night. She said you're famous now." I laughed softly. "Maybe for a minute. But don't worry, I'm still your teacher." I spent the rest of the day with them, painting sunsets, cutting colored paper, cleaning up spilled water cups. For the first time, I understood what my grandfather meant by impact. It wasn't about scale, it was about presence. That evening, after the last child left, I sat alone in the quiet classroom. The sunlight streamed through the window, casting golden lines across the floor. I opened my sketchbook and wrote, "The Anderson Foundation for Art and Hope." I didn't know how yet, but that's what I was going to build. A place where children like mine could heal through art. A place my grandfather would have been proud of. 2 days later, the family gathered again, this time at Harold's office. My parents looked smaller somehow. Isabella wore sunglasses even indoors. The silence between us was thick. Harold began the meeting calmly. "As of this morning, Grace Anderson is the legal owner of all Anderson holdings. However, she may choose to restructure or redistribute assets as she sees fit." My father leaned forward. "We can work together," he said quickly. "You keep majority control, we help manage operations. Everyone wins." I looked at him and saw desperation where arrogance used to live. "Dad, the company builds luxury condos. My students can't even afford art supplies. I'm not sure everyone has been winning for a while." Isabella flinched at my words. "Grace, please. You don't have to destroy everything." "I'm not destroying it," I said quietly. "I'm transforming it." Harold nodded approvingly. "Your grandfather predicted you'd say that." I turned to my parents. "I'm creating a foundation, one that funds art therapy and education for children with disabilities and trauma. The profits from the company will go there." My mother gasped. "You can't. That's our legacy." "No, Mom," I said softly. That's my purpose. For the first time, she didn't argue. Weeks passed. Headlines filled the papers. Teacher turns billionaire fortune into hope fund. Some called me naive, others called me a saint. I ignored them all. I was too busy working. We converted one of the Anderson buildings into a community art center. The marble floor stayed, but the walls filled with children's drawings. Every brushstroke carried more meaning than the expensive art that used to hang there. Isabella visited once, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Thank you," I replied. "You could help, you know." She hesitated. "I don't know how." "Start by showing up," I said. She did. Slowly. Quietly. At first she just carried supplies. Then she started painting beside the children. And little by little, the sharp edges around her began to fade. One night, as I locked up the center, I found Harold waiting outside. The city lights glowed behind him. "You're changing lives already," he said. "I'm trying," I answered. "But sometimes I wonder if grandfather really knew what he was asking me to do." "It's hard." He smiled. "He knew it would be. But he also knew you'd never confuse hard with impossible." We walked in silence for a while. The city noise felt softer somehow, less harsh. "Harold," I asked finally, "did my grandfather ever talk about why he chose me?" He stopped and looked at me. "Every time. He said Isabella inherited his intelligence, but you inherited his heart. And that the world needs more hearts." The word stayed with me all night. By the third month, the foundation had grown faster than anyone expected. Donors reached out. Teachers wrote letters. Parents sent pictures of their kids smiling with paint-covered hands. My father hadn't spoken to me since the reading. My mother sent short emails, awkward apologies wrapped in polite sentences. Isabella, though, was different. She started volunteering full-time. She still wore her tailored suits, but she no longer hid behind them. One afternoon she came into my office holding a stack of drawings. "The kids made these for you," she said. I looked through them, bright splashes of color, little stick figures with smiles too big for their faces. "Thank you," I whispered. Isabella lingered. "Grace." "I'm sorry." I looked up. Her eyes were red, her voice small. "I didn't know how much I hurt you. I just wanted them to love me." "I know," I said. "We both did." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Can we start over?" "Yes," I said. "But not as rivals, as sisters." For the first time since childhood, we hugged. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Weeks later, Harold invited us to dinner at the same St. Regis ballroom where everything had fallen apart. The chandeliers still sparkled, but the energy felt lighter. Instead of investors and politicians, the room was filled with teachers, social workers, and parents. Harold tapped his glass gently. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we honor the legacy of William Anderson, the man who believed that true wealth serves others. And the woman who proved him right." Applause echoed through the hall. I looked at the faces around me, Isabella smiling through tears, my parents sitting quietly at the table, humbled but present. For once, they looked proud without comparison. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the podium. "My grandfather built skyscrapers," I said softly, "but he also built me. He taught me that art isn't just color on canvas, it's courage in motion. And every child deserves a brush." The room fell silent again, but this time it was peaceful. Later that night, Isabella found me near the window overlooking Central Park. Do you ever miss the old life? She asked. I thought for a moment. No, I said. But sometimes I miss not knowing how heavy truth can be. She nodded. It's heavy, but it's also freeing. We stood there quietly, two sisters who had finally learned what family meant. As I looked out over the city lights, I realized something else. Money can build towers, but only love builds foundations that last. That night, as I left the ballroom, Harold handed me another envelope. My heart skipped. Another one? He smiled. The last. Your grandfather wrote it for when you felt uncertain. I opened it right there in the hallway. It said only one sentence. Remember, Grace, what you give away is the only thing that's truly yours. I folded the letter and held it close. The truth felt heavier than gold, but also warmer than light. And as I walked out into the cool night air, I knew this story wasn't finished. The real test wasn't winning the inheritance, it was living up to it. Because sometimes, receiving everything forces you to decide who you really are. And I was just beginning to find out. The morning after that letter, I woke up before sunrise. The city outside my window was still half asleep. The streets glistened with the night's rain, and the soft hum of distant traffic filled the silence. For years, I had started my mornings preparing paintbrushes, lesson plans, and coffee in a chipped mug. Now, there were meetings waiting, assistants calling, emails asking for donations and decisions. I had stepped into a world that once looked impossible from my small apartment window. But as I watched the light break across the skyline, I realized that power wasn't about status, it was about what you do with your sunrise. I dressed simply, in the same modest clothes I always wore to school. No designer suits, no expensive jewelry. The world might see me differently now, but I didn't want to change who I was. I caught the subway like always. People glanced at me, some recognizing me from the news, some not. I didn't care. I was on my way to the place that still made me feel real, PS 47. When I walked into my classroom, the children cheered. Miss Anderson's on TV, one shouted. She's famous, another said, holding up his tablet. My face was on the front page of a newspaper app, the billionaire teacher who chose kindness over cash. I laughed, shaking my head. I'm still your teacher, I said. And we still have to clean up the paint before recess. They groaned playfully, and everything felt normal again. For the first time since that unforgettable night at the St. Regis, I felt peace. Later that day, Harold visited the school. He walked slowly down the hallway, his cane tapping the floor with measured grace. Still teaching, I see, he said, smiling as he stepped into the classroom. I wouldn't know what to do if I stopped, I told him. He nodded approvingly. Your grandfather once said that wisdom lives in classrooms, not boardrooms. You're proving him right. We sat together as the children painted. One little boy, Liam, proudly showed Harold his drawing, a colorful mess of blues and reds. It's the ocean, he declared. Harold chuckled softly. Then it's the most beautiful ocean I've ever seen. After class, we went to my office at the new foundation headquarters. It still smelled like fresh paint and hope. Grace, Harold began, there's something we need to discuss. Your father's company board is requesting a meeting. They're unsettled by the changes. I expected that, I said. They've lived on profits for too long to understand purpose. He handed me a letter from the board. Emergency session. Vote of confidence. They wanted to test if I could handle leadership or push me out. I smiled faintly. Then we'll give them a reason to believe. That evening, I went to my parents' brownstone for the first time in months. My mother opened the door, her eyes weary. She looked older somehow, as if truth itself had aged her. "Grace," she whispered, stepping aside. "You came." I nodded. "We need to talk." We sat in the living room surrounded by silent symbols of wealth, marble floors, antique lamps, paintings of people no one in our family even remembered. My father entered a moment later. He looked smaller too, though his voice still carried that edge of control. "I assume this is about the board," he said. "It's about everything," I replied. "But yes, we'll start there." He crossed his arms. "You're not ready for this. Managing an empire isn't the same as teaching art." I looked at him calmly. "No, it's not. But both require patience, vision, and the ability to turn chaos into something meaningful." My mother placed her hands on her lap. "Robert, please," she said softly. "Maybe we should listen for once." He turned away. "Listen? She's destroying what generations built." "Dad," I said quietly, "you built walls. I'm building doors." He froze. My words hung in the air. For the first time, he had nothing to say. I stood up. "I'm giving you both a chance to be part of this, if you can let go of what you think success means." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "We don't deserve that chance." "Maybe not," I said gently. "But everyone deserves redemption." When I left their house that night, I felt a strange calm. The world was finally shifting, not just for me, but for them too. The next morning, the board meeting took place at the Anderson Tower downtown. The long glass table stretched across the conference room, surrounded by men in suits who had known me as the quiet daughter. They didn't look happy to see me. "Miss Anderson," one of them said as I entered, "we're concerned about the direction you're taking. Philanthropy is admirable, but we're running a business, not a charity." I smiled politely. "That's where you're mistaken. We're running a legacy. And if a legacy doesn't serve people, it isn't worth preserving." A few shifted uncomfortably. Another man, gray-haired and stern, leaned forward. "With respect, you're inexperienced. We've thrived under Robert's leadership. Your reforms will drain profits." I opened a folder and placed several documents on the table. "Under my father's leadership, profits grew, yes. But so did corruption. Here are the reports your accountants buried: unpaid taxes, inflated valuations, and a housing project that displaced low-income families." A murmur spread across the room. I continued, "We will clean it up. We will rebuild with honesty. And I'll donate 40% of company profits to the foundation." "That's not a loss. It's an investment in trust." One board member adjusted his tie nervously. "And if we refuse?" "Then I'll invoke Article 9 of my grandfather's will," I said calmly, "which allows me to replace the board entirely in case of ethical conflict." "I'd prefer not to. But I will." Silence. Then, one by one, heads nodded. The motion passed unanimously. When the meeting ended, Harold smiled from his seat at the back. "I told your grandfather you'd be formidable." "I don't feel formidable," I said. "I feel terrified." "That's how you know you're doing it right," he replied. By spring, the Anderson Foundation had expanded across the city. We opened art centers in Brooklyn, Harlem, and the Bronx. The halls echoed with laughter, paint splashes, and the kind of joy you can't fake. Children from every background came through those doors, some shy, some scarred, some broken. But each left with color on their hands and hope in their hearts. One afternoon, I found Isabella kneeling beside a little boy who was struggling to draw. "He says his brain moves faster than his hands," she told me. So slow it down, I said softly. She smiled. That's what you always said to me, isn't it? Slow down. He finished his drawing, a heart surrounded by messy blue strokes. Isabella looked at me and whispered, he said it's his mom's voice. Tears filled my eyes. Then it's perfect. Isabella had changed. The sharpness in her voice had softened. She no longer spoke in legal terms, only in human ones. She even laughed easily now, especially when the children teased her about her fancy shoes. At the end of that day, she approached me as I was locking up. Grace, she said quietly, do you ever wonder what grandfather would say if he could see this? I looked around at the painted walls, the happy mess, the sunlight streaming in. I think he'd say it finally feels like home. Weeks turned into months. My parents started visiting the foundation every Wednesday. At first, they stayed near the entrance, awkward and out of place. Then one day, I saw my mother helping a child tie an apron, smiling as paint splattered across her hands. My father began reading to kids in the small library, his voice trembling whenever they clapped for him. Slowly, they were learning what love without labels felt like. One evening, after everyone had left, I walked into the main hall. The paintings of my students hung alongside framed photos of my grandfather. In the corner, Harold stood watching quietly. He'd be proud, he said. I hope so, I whispered. He nodded. Do you want to know something he told me once? He said, the measure of a life is what remains after the applause fades. You're building something that will last long after the noise dies down. I smiled. Then maybe I finally understand him. He looked at me thoughtfully. Not yet, he said. But you will. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went to my grandfather's old office in the penthouse. The lights of the city shimmered below. On his desk was a photograph I had never seen before, me at 12, showing him my first painting. He was laughing, his hand on my shoulder. Behind the frame, a folded note was taped. I gently removed it. It said, if you're reading this, it means you've found your strength. Don't let comfort steal it. I sat there in the quiet room, the hum of the city beneath me, realizing how much he had planned, not just the inheritance, but the lessons after it. He had known the greatest danger wasn't greed, but comfort. The kind that dulls purpose and slows passion. The next morning, I called Harold. We need to expand, I said. He chuckled. I knew this day would come. Where do you want to start? Everywhere, I said simply. We began planning new branches in other states. Art therapy in hospitals. Programs for veterans. Support for teachers. It grew faster than I could have imagined. And with every new opening, I felt my grandfather's voice somewhere in the back of my mind, whispering, keep building. By the end of the year, the foundation had helped over 2,000 children. Letters poured in, thank you notes, drawings, and stories from parents who said their kids finally smiled again. One letter stood out. It came from a mother in Ohio whose daughter had lost her father to illness. Your program saved her, it read. She paints the sky every day now. She says it's where her dad lives. I held the letter for a long time. Then I placed it on my grandfather's old desk beside his photo. We're doing it, grandfather, I whispered. We're really doing it. But just as everything seemed perfect, life, like it always does, threw a storm into the calm. One evening, Harold called me sounding unusually tense. Grace, we have a problem. A serious one. My heart dropped. What happened? It's your father, he said slowly. He's under investigation. Fraud charges. Financial misconduct from the old accounts. It's going public tomorrow. I closed my eyes, the words hitting like a physical blow. What does that mean for the foundation? Nothing directly, Harold said, but the media will link it to you. You need to be prepared. Prepared. That word felt too small for the earthquake coming. The next morning, headlines exploded. Anderson patriarch under federal investigation. News vans parked outside the foundation. Cameras followed me to school. Parents whispered. My staff looked nervous. Isabella called crying. He's terrified, Grace. He's saying he'll lose everything. I sighed. He already did, when he lost his integrity. But he's our father, she said softly. I know, I whispered. And maybe that's why I have to face this the right way. That afternoon, I held a press conference. Reporters shouted questions. Is it true your father laundered money? Are you involved? Will you resign? I took a deep breath and said calmly, the Anderson Foundation stands for transparency, compassion, and integrity. Those values will not change. My father's actions are his own, and I won't defend what's wrong. But I will offer him what he never offered me, grace. The crowd went quiet. I continued, forgiveness isn't weakness. It's strength. My father taught me what not to do. My grandfather taught me what to become. I choose to honor the latter. The next day, the headlines changed. Billionaire teacher responds with grace. When I visited my father at his townhouse later that week, he looked broken. The powerful man who once commanded boardrooms now sat in silence, holding his trembling hands. I failed you, he said. No, I replied softly. You failed yourself. But it's not too late to learn. Tears filled his eyes. I don't know how. Then start the way we teach the children, I said gently. With your hands. Come volunteer. Paint something. Build something. He laughed weakly. You think painting can fix me? I think love can, I said. He looked at me for a long moment. Your grandfather was right. You are the strongest of us. And for the first time in my life, I believed him. The following weeks brought healing. My father began volunteering quietly, away from cameras. My mother joined him, guiding children through small projects. Watching them laugh with the same kids they once pitted was something I never thought I'd see. The foundation's work expanded further. Hospitals called asking for partnerships. Colleges invited me to speak. Awards came, but this time, they didn't matter. What mattered were the people walking through those doors, finding purpose again. Late one evening, Isabella found me alone in the art hall, staring at a child's painting of a big tree under a golden sky. He said, "That's you," she whispered. Me? I smiled.
Yes, she said. He said you're the tree that makes everyone feel safe. I looked at the painting again, and my throat tightened. Then I guess I'll have to keep standing tall. But as peaceful as everything seemed, Harold's words echoed in my mind, don't let comfort steal your strength. And he was right. Because something was coming that would test every lesson I'd learned, every ounce of grace I had left. Something that would make me face not just the world, but myself. The test came quietly, the way most storms do before they break. It was late autumn, and the air in New York had turned cold and sharp. The trees outside the foundation shimmered in orange and gold. Inside, we were preparing for our biggest event of the year, the Art of Healing Gala, a fundraiser that would help us open 5 new centers across the country. Invitations had gone out, media coverage was set, and the children were working on special paintings that would be auctioned to raise money. Everything felt perfect. Almost too perfect. 3 days before the gala, Harold came into my office, his face pale. Grace, he said softly, we have a problem. I set down my pen. Another one? He sighed. I wish it were simple. Someone's been leaking financial information to the press, twisting numbers, making it look like the foundation is misusing funds. My heart sank. Who would do that? Harold looked down. We think it's someone inside. Someone who wants to damage your reputation before the gala. I closed my eyes. It felt like the old world creeping back in, the world of envy, pride, and greed. The world I thought I had left behind. Do you know who? I asked quietly. He hesitated. There's evidence it might be. Isabella. For a long time I couldn't speak. My first reaction was disbelief. My sister, the same woman who had been painting with children, who had cried in my arms, who had sworn she was changing, could she really do this? No, I whispered finally. Not her. She wouldn't. I hope you're right, Harold said. But we need to investigate before this spreads further. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window of my small apartment, yes, I still lived there, watching the city lights flicker. I thought about everything we'd built. Everything we'd healed. And how fragile goodness can be when ambition creeps back in. By morning, the headlines began appearing online. Anderson Foundation under review. Billionaire teacher accused of financial mismanagement. They were full of speculation, half-truths, and questions with no answers. The story was spreading fast. I arrived at the foundation early. Staff members looked nervous. Volunteers whispered. Even the children seemed quieter than usual. I gathered everyone in the main hall. We tell the truth, I said simply. We don't hide. We don't lie. And we don't panic. Everything we've done here is real. Let them see it. We opened every record, every receipt, every account. Transparency was our only shield. By afternoon, Harold confirmed what I already feared. The anonymous emails sent to journalists had come from Isabella's work computer. He looked at me sadly. I'm so sorry, Grace. I sat down slowly, my legs weak. She must have been pressured, I murmured. Maybe someone used her. Harold shook his head. The messages were written in her style. She referenced personal details only she would know. I think she panicked after your father's trial. The media's attention, it scared her. I pressed my palms together, my voice barely a whisper. She was trying to protect herself. Not destroy me. He nodded gently. Even so, this could undo everything. For the first time in years, I felt the old ache return, the ache of betrayal, of being unseen, of giving love only to have it turned into a weapon. But I also remembered something my grandfather once told me: compassion is not weakness. It's remembering who you are when others forget who they are. I took a deep breath. We'll handle this with truth and kindness. No revenge. That evening, I went to Isabella's apartment. She opened the door with red eyes, her face pale. The moment she saw me, she burst into tears. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I didn't mean to hurt you. I thought the media would come after me again because of Dad. I thought if I leaked something small, they'd focus on that instead of the trial. But they twisted everything. I ruined everything. Her voice broke completely. I don't deserve to be your sister. I stood there silently, the storm inside me slowly settling. I could have yelled. I could have turned away. But all I saw was fear, the same fear I used to feel every time our parents made me believe I wasn't enough. Isabella, I said softly, you don't need to deserve forgiveness. You just need to accept it. She shook her head. How can you still be kind to me? Because that's what grandfather wanted us to learn, I said. Kindness isn't about others deserving it. It's about us refusing to let pain make us cruel. We stood there for a long time, the silence between us filled with regret and love and something close to peace. The next morning, Isabella went public. She called a press conference and admitted everything. Cameras flashed as she spoke, her voice trembling but steady. My sister built something pure, she said. And I tried to protect it the wrong way. The foundation's books are clean. The only thing stained is my judgment. The crowd was silent. Then a reporter asked, why tell the truth now? Isabella looked straight at the camera. Because I finally learned from the only person who ever taught me what truth costs. When she stepped down from the podium, I was waiting for her. The moment our eyes met, she broke into tears again. I hugged her tightly. The applause that followed wasn't loud, it was quiet, slow, and full of respect. The gala went on as planned. The ballroom was transformed into a gallery of color. Every wall displayed paintings from the children, small canvases filled with stories of healing. One painting showed a bright yellow sun with the words, "Love wins," scribbled in crooked letters. That night, I stood on stage under soft lights, looking at the faces of donors, teachers, parents, and students. When I was little, my parents told me that success meant having everything. But my grandfather taught me that success means giving everything that matters. I paused, letting the room breathe. This foundation isn't about me. It's about the children who teach us that broken things can become beautiful again. It's about remembering that love is stronger than money, and forgiveness louder than fame. The crowd stood in silence, some wiping tears. Then applause swelled, soft at first, then strong and endless.
When it ended, Harold walked up with a smile that reached his eyes. "Your grandfather would be so proud," he whispered. "Maybe," I said, smiling back, "but I think he'd say, there's still work to do." Months passed. The storm faded. The foundation grew. We opened centers in Texas, Florida, and California. We started programs for elderly veterans, single mothers, and children with chronic illness. Each place carried the same message painted above its entrance: art heals. Love lasts. One winter morning, I visited the first center we built in Queens. It was snowing lightly, the world quiet and white. Inside, children painted snowflakes, laughing as they tried to catch them on their brushes. My father was there too, sitting in a circle with 3 kids, helping them glue paper stars. My mother handed out cocoa, her designer gloves long replaced with washable ones. And Isabella, she was kneeling beside a boy who couldn't speak, showing him how to make his first brushstroke. The boy smiled, and she cried quietly. Harold stood near the window, watching. "It's strange," he said softly. "All of this began because you refused to hate." I nodded. "Hate builds walls. Love paints over them." He chuckled. "You sound just like William now." I smiled. Then maybe his lessons worked. That evening, I went home and opened my grandfather's final letter again, the one he wrote when he still believed I'd someday find my voice. It said, "If you ever doubt your worth, look at the lives you've touched. That's where your reflection truly lives." I looked around my tiny apartment, at the children's paintings stacked on the wall, the newspaper clippings, and the letters from parents. My reflection was everywhere. I realized then that wealth was never the inheritance. Faith was. Faith that love would outlast failure. Faith that compassion could survive pride. Faith that people, no matter how lost, could find their way back to goodness. And maybe that was the lesson my grandfather had been teaching all along. A year later, the Anderson Foundation celebrated its 2nd anniversary. The ballroom from that painful night at the St. Regis was now a permanent art hall for the foundation. The chandeliers still hung above, but instead of glittering guests, the room was filled with children in paint-smeared aprons. The air smelled like crayons and laughter. Harold, older now but still strong, gave a short speech. "We started as a family divided by pride," he said. "And we stand here today as a family united by purpose." I took the stage next. "There was a time I thought my story ended in shame," I said softly. "But now I know, it was only the first chapter. Every scar, every heartbreak, every moment of invisibility was preparing me for this." I looked around the hall, the children, my parents, Isabella, Harold, and the staff who had become my family. "You can lose everything and still have everything if you never lose yourself," I said. The applause was long, warm, and gentle. As it faded, I noticed a little girl tugging at my sleeve. She handed me a small card she'd painted herself. It was a simple tree with roots shaped like hearts. Beneath it, she'd written, "Thank you for giving me colors again." I knelt down and hugged her. "You gave them to yourself," I whispered. That night, after everyone left, I stood alone in the hall. The lights were low, the paintings glowing softly under their frames. I could almost feel my grandfather's presence. I imagined him standing beside me, smiling that gentle smile. "You were right, grandfather," I whispered. "Money didn't make me rich. Love did." The quiet of the room answered like a heartbeat. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and slow. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely at peace, not because I had everything, but because I finally understood what enough meant. And that's how Grace Anderson turned the weight of disappointment into the light of purpose. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to breathe, and remember, sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest strength. Red heart before you go, please like this video if it moved you, subscribe for more true and inspiring life stories, and comment below. Tell us, have you ever been underestimated but proved everyone wrong? We love hearing your stories. And as Grace would say, keep painting your life with kindness.